Greetings and welcome to the Recombobulation Area. My name is Dan Schaefer. Thank you for joining us. Wisconsin's partisan primary is now less than 1 month away, and in that primary, voters will be making a number of decisions, depending on where in the state you live. But the big one for Democrats across the state will be the primary in the race for governor, where now 5 candidates are vying to be the party's nominee. One of those candidates is here with us today. She is the former executive director of NARAL Pro-Choice Wisconsin, a former state assembly representative, a current state senator representing the 26th district, which includes much of the city of Madison. She's a small business owner and an attorney. She is Kelda Roys. Kelda, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to the Recombobulation Area.
She is so happy to be with you, Dan.
Well, I appreciate you being here. Peach, appreciate you working through a couple tech snafus as we were getting this going. Always wonderful for you to join us here at the Recombobulation Area. So before we get into some of the issues and some of the other bigger picture stuff about the campaign, this week is an important one on the calendar for all campaigns in Wisconsin, as Wednesday, July 15th is the deadline to report the data from the most recent campaign finance period, which runs from January 1st to June 30th. Your campaign has already released the numbers for this, saying that you've raised $1.2 million. There was some more information along with that headline number that your campaign released too. Can you break that all down for us?
Sure. I'd say the biggest takeaway is that my campaign is funded by Wisconsinites, everyday people. 93% of my donations come from Wisconsinites who live here, who are just making grassroots donations because they really care. They want to see a governor who is going to prioritize healthcare and public education and protecting our freedoms from this dangerous authoritarian regime. That stands in really stark contrast to how some of the other candidates are raising their money. I have, since 2011, I have said I'm not going to fund my campaigns with corporate PAC dollars. I've never taken a penny from APAC. I'm not funded by the crypto or the AI industry. And I'm certainly not the choice of, billionaires like Elon Musk. But I think that how you raise money does give a little bit of a preview for the kind of leader that you'll be and the compromises that you're willing to make. And as somebody who believes deeply in public financing for campaigns so that anybody can run for office, whether you've got rich friends or not, I'm proud of the way that this campaign, like all my campaigns, has really built that trust of Wisconsin voters in every community in the state.
Mm-hmm. So there was some news today about another candidate and their campaign finance submissions. Lieutenant Governor Sara Rodriguez, they're planning to address this at a press conference later this afternoon, so I don't want to speculate or anything. But they announced that they have fired their campaign manager after, quote, discovering serious mismanagement and inaccuracies in campaign finance filings she prepared. Some of the other candidates in this race have already weighed in on this. What is your reaction to that news, to that story?
Well, as somebody who really believes in transparent, open government, it's obviously very disappointing to see campaign finance reports not taken seriously and given the care that all of us deserve as members of the public. And, there's a reason that all of us have to report every dollar that we take in and every dollar that we spend. It's so that voters can feel confident about the choices that they're making. People want to know, are my elected leaders making decisions because they're getting a corporate PAC check, or are they doing it because they think that's the right thing to do? And so when reports are filed late or they're inaccurate, that obviously can really undermine the public's trust in elections. Now, obviously, everybody makes mistakes. That's why amending your finance reports are a really normal and routine part of the process. But the gaps that they're talking about here are enormous. And I have to say, I just skimmed over everybody's reports in January, and even I, just at first glance, saw, wow, there's so many duplicate contributions. This is really odd. And I noticed that really with just a cursory, look through. And so the idea that this has gone by for now almost 7 months without being discovered is obviously very troubling.
Yeah, so this morning, Joel Brennan's campaign issued a release asking if this, basically suggesting that this type of thing should be disqualifying. Do you agree with that?
I think somebody who serves on the Joint Finance Committee, I understand what an awesome responsibility it is to be charged with managing public dollars. And we deserve to have leaders who are going to take that responsibility very seriously and be competent and capable of doing it and making sure that the staff and the systems are in place to protect against, whatever happened here. Right? It's not that everybody has to be perfect all the time. It is that you have to have systems in place and people in place who are capable of doing the work and catching a mistake when it happens.
hmm Well, this is obviously an evolving story, and we'll continue to find out more of the information as the day unfolds here. Always, we can't go a day without another discombobulating story in this primary. It seems like, but let's zoom out
Although
a little
none
bit.
from me, you haven't seen me make unforced errors on this campaign.
Oh, don't jinx yourself there.
I
I mean,
am
you can't,
reliable.
you don't want to jinx yourself with something
Fair
like
enough.
that. No, I'm just kidding. Um, so, zooming out then, you launched your campaign in September. You've also run for governor previously in 2018. What did you learn from that other run for governor that helped you inform your approach this time around?
Well, I learned that, the people of this state really do want the same things fundamentally. And this is a lesson that I think has continually been reinforced to me as I have spent 25 years working to elect Democrats in every part of the state, including the deep red ones, and knocking on doors in every single election cycle to just get in front of voters and say, what's on your mind? What's important to you? And um, there are so many efforts to divide Wisconsinites and to set us apart from one another for political gain. And that is really pernicious, but it's also false. And the more that I see of this state, the more deeply I love it and know that we deserve better. We can have a state with higher wages. We can lower costs on all the big ticket items like housing and healthcare and childcare and utilities. And I've got detailed plans for how we do all of this. We can have the best public schools in the country once again. We had it when I was growing up. I'm 47. I got the best public schools here. We can do that again. And we can also protect our rights and freedoms from this dangerous authoritarian regime. We can do all of that, but first we have to win this election.
hmm So on this campaign over the last several months, there have been many, many candidate forums. We helped host one of those
Like,
a few months ago. But throughout this process, you've gotten to hear about a lot of other candidates' policy plans, right? So, you know,
more or less, yeah.
uh, I mean, of course, these are all Democrats, so there are a lot of issues that folks are going to agree on. But what do you feel like is something that really sets you apart from the other candidates when it comes to some of those policy proposals that you've been talking about in these forums?
I would say because I have the most experience in and around state government, and I'm the only candidate that's actually turned progressive ideas into law again and again and again. Most of the candidates in this race have never passed a bill. That has given me just the ability, the opportunity to learn a lot about public policy and how state government works. And so I've been able to bring really, really detailed, specific plans to this race, many of which are actually not just bullet points, but actual bills that are ready to be passed into law. And that is one reason that Jessica McBride of Wisconsin right now said, all these Democrats with their nonsense ideas, but the one who really scares me is Roy's because she's the one who's got the bills ready to go and could actually get it done.
So,
I think,
so you're encouraged that she's
well,
frightened by your ideas.
I mean, I think the Republicans looking at this race do see me as the biggest threat to Tom Tiffany because I will eviscerate him. I will hold him accountable for every horrible thing that he has done to our state. And I can do so effectively and build that broad coalition that we need, not just to win the general election, but also to deliver the Senate and the Assembly so that we can actually have a Democratic trifecta and then use it and govern.
Mhm.
I'm just excited about and not afraid to use power to get things done for Wisconsinites. And I think that is something that Democrats don't always get with our political leaders. Sometimes we're have maybe an ambivalent relationship to power, or we see Dems in Washington kind of deer in the headlights. What do we do during this authoritarian phase? We stand up and we fight. That's what we do.
First 100 days then, what would a Kelda Roys administration look like? What would standing up and fighting and going after this the way that you're suggesting here, what would that look like if you were to become governor?
Well, job one is affordability, and that's a component of both raising wages. So we're going to raise the minimum wage. I'm the lead author of that bill, and restore collective bargaining rights for public and private sector workers, because those two things together are how we actually built the middle class. And Wisconsinites have seen our earnings lag behind our Midwestern states. So that's really important for money in people's pockets. Number two is implement my plans for how we can reduce the cost of housing and prescription drugs, utilities, childcare, all of which again are detailed. But I'll focus just a minute on healthcare because this is a big, big differentiator between me and my friends in this primary. They're all focused on Medicaid expansion, which, I fought hard for the last 16 years, but which has been functionally taken off the table by the changes made by Trump and Tiffany in that big, ugly bill from last summer. My plan is very different. I'm a healthcare for all person. I think healthcare should be a right and it shouldn't be rationed based on your job or your health. But how do we get there from here? And how can a governor facilitate that? I will open up the state health insurance plan. The coverage that I get as a state legislator, that every state employee gets, and let anybody buy in. So recombobulation area, you could buy in, Dan, as an individual or for your family, but other employers could buy in too. So school districts or unions, a big manufacturing company could all buy in to the high quality, comprehensive, nonprofit healthcare that the state has. And this will pay big, big dividends for all of us in terms of lowering healthcare costs, reducing uncompensated care, and keeping our rural hospitals and clinics open. It's just a really smart way to take what's working in healthcare and make it more available to people.
Mhm.
I'll also say public education is absolutely top of mind for me. I'm a mom and stepmom of five, and my kids range from 25 to 4. And I am very, very passionate about early childhood education, higher ed, but especially public K-12, which has really been starved of resources for decades. So my plan will fully fund public education at the state level, meeting the state's funding commitments for special education, take the pressure off of property taxpayers because we are being absolutely asked to pay way too much of the cost. And referendums are really divisive, right? It's not good for communities to do that again and again. But most importantly, I have a plan to bring the private voucher scheme finally to a responsible end. And I am the only candidate in this race that has a plan to do that. Several of the other Democrats, including Rodriguez, are pro voucher. And I just believe public dollars belong in public schools. So this is a big area where there's difference amongst the candidates.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, education, obviously a huge issue in this race. Obviously, when you zoom out to the last open race for governor in Wisconsin, we took a, pretty hard right turn on that particular issue. Beyond like the funding aspect of it, and I know you've talked about this a bit, but beyond the fully funding public schools or however you might want to characterize that, there's different ways that people might want to say what's fully funding, what's not, whatever. Is there a change component
Oh, yeah.
to what you want to bring to the way the state, it oversees public education too? Because I think for some people, it's like more funding would be great. I agree with more funding, but that can't be the only answer.
Right.
How do you
And
see it?
I feel that so deeply as a parent, right? I want my kids to have not just like fancy school buildings and, plenty of pencils and well-paid teachers who are experts and not overworked because they have to work part-time at Quick Trip, to make ends meet. Um, I want my kids to have an education that is joyful and that sets them up not just to be good workers and self-sufficient, but to be great citizens and to be the best version of themselves. And I think, we talk a lot about school funding because you can't have great schools without money. We do need resources, especially at a time when schools have not had resources for decades on end. But that's why I say my vision for schools is the best public schools in the nation. And what that means to me is that schools are safe and they're inclusive and they're belonging. And so that's everything from having school-based mental health to um, having gun safety laws so that kids and teachers can feel safe in schools. It's about having arts every day for kids every year. Not this whole business of, okay, once a week you can get a music class, or maybe you might have art for a semester. No, kids need those opportunities. Um, it shouldn't just be a privilege for the wealthy. I want our schools to be places where technology use is sparse and strategic and evidence-based. Let's get rid of these Chromebooks in the early years. Let's make sure that there is no AI between K and 8, because we should not be doing experiments on our kids. And that's unfortunately what has happened, especially since COVID. I'm a big believer in face to face and pencil and paper. Give kids the actual fine motor skills and the social skills that are such an important part of their development at school. Don't have them be stuck in a Chromebook or with a telephone. And that's why I've authored legislation to have a bell to bell cell phone ban and to really take on big tech and social media that is preying on our kids. I mean, our kids need us to stand up for them. So those are just a couple of the things that I care about in terms of making our public schools better.
Mm-hmm. And then, so, beyond schools, getting back to what we were talking about with the many forums that you've all participated
Yes.
in, has there been a point at any of those forums when you heard another candidate discuss a certain policy proposal or a certain idea or concept or whatever it is and thought you might want to incorporate it into your own plan? Did you hear anything out there and said, that's a pretty good
Oh
one,
yeah,
actually?
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's the great thing when you're on stage with other Democrats. One of the things that Crowley always talked about that I think is very compelling, and actually he stated it better than the sort of idea that I had in my head, was the idea of a wrong door model. So if somebody's coming in to state government to get something done, if they need something, if they have a problem, you don't want to say, oh, well, go over here, call this department. I don't know. I can't help you with that problem. You want to just say, okay, great, and then handle it, manage it so that um, if somebody wants to start a small business, they can just come in one door and get everything that they need. The way that I have been thinking about this is, how do we use technology to essentially deliver better, more efficient public services to people and let our state employees actually handle the higher level challenges and make state agencies talk to each other with technology. But the way that David talked about this, I just think is you get it right away what he's talking
Hmm.
about.
Then no wrong door. That's
Yeah,
yeah,
it's great. Yeah, I thought
pretty
you were
good.
going to ask me if there were times that I wanted to fact check, and I was like, literally every forum. I was like,
Well,
where's the fact checker when we need one?
do you care to share an example there?
Um, well, there's a lot of the other candidates are really focused on Medicaid expansion, and I've heard things about how Medicaid expansion is still going to net the state money, even though we know that that is not the case any longer. And I just want to say, please read the state Medicaid director's memo. It is very dense, but it is readable, and you can actually see why Medicaid expansion is not, unfortunately, at this point, a feasible option for Wisconsin. And of course, I hope that it will be again someday, because we absolutely do need to cover everybody. Everybody deserves health care. And, what Donald Trump and Tom Tiffany have done to this country is devastating. And the loss of access to healthcare over the next couple of years is going to be devastating.
Mhm. And so the just to zoom out and to kind of get a little context on what you're talking about, that Medicaid expansion then. So Obamacare passes, it starts to get phased in. States have the option as it's phased in to accept or I guess deny the Medicaid expansion dollars. At
Right.
this point, the vast majority of states have.
Right.
But that took us up to almost exactly a year ago when the One Big Beautiful Bill Act was signed into law by
Right.
President Donald Trump. And what you're suggesting here is that made the Medicaid expansion option that we have talked about for a long time here in Wisconsin. I mean, one of my first jobs as a reporter was covering healthcare at during the time of the healthcare.gov rollout when I was at Biz Times
Hmm.
Milwaukee. So we were talking about Medicaid expansion for more than a decade here,
Oh, yeah.
back to when I was just a cub reporter. And so, like, that changed in July of last year, is what you're
Right.
saying.
Exactly. Exactly. And, you know, in 2009, it was my very first term in the state assembly. I was the vice chair of the Committee on Health. The fact that we were able to lead the charge on expanding Badger Care, which is our Medicaid program, to cover 80,000 previously uninsured Wisconsinites. Like, that is life changing. And when people say, what is your proudest accomplishment? I mean, that is what it is for sure. Because I know what it's like to not have health insurance, and how scary that is. So it's a very bitter pill to swallow. But the problem is that they had completely changed the economics and the policy requirements. So they used to basically, it was crazy for states to not do it. And now it would be crazy for states to do it. And there are fiscal and policy reasons why that are very complicated. But if anybody is curious, you can email my office and I will send you Bill Hanna's memo.
Very interesting stuff. Um, Okay, so obviously healthcare is going to be a big issue in the next state budget. Whoever the governor is going to have to make a lot of decisions on a whole range of issues in the state budget. But being not just in the legislature, but on the powerful Joint Committee on Finance, I feel like that's probably given you a unique view in the budget writing
Mhm.
process in Wisconsin. So what did you learn about the budget from serving on that committee, and how would you approach putting together a proposal for the state budget as governor? And what would some of those priorities be?
Well, that is really how you learn about state government, right? Because you go line by line and you see every department, every agency, um, the programs that they are doing. If it's not in the state budget, it's probably not happening. So that is really how you understand not just the money piece, but the that state government is delivering for people. I also, people would be shocked to know how much of our budget goes to things like prisons. For instance, we spend more on the Department of Corrections than we do on the University of Wisconsin. And when you think about what's an economic engine for our state that benefits every single one of us versus something that, we are so far behind the times and it is not actually making us any safer to incarcerate 3 times as many people as our neighboring state of Minnesota does. You really see, like, boy, some of the investments that the state is making are not in our best interest, and we need some major shifts. The other thing I'll say is Republicans have very effectively flattened our once progressive tax structure. Now, millionaires and billionaires for like 15 years have been getting functionally a free ride and not paying their fair share. And we've got billions of dollars going out the door, not just to private school voucher schemes, but also to pay big polluters and big profitable companies with no requirement for investment or jobs. I mean, think about Foxconn, but like a little bit of Foxconn is happening every single year in the state budget. We just recently got the Fiscal Bureau estimate that the data center tax breaks, the subsidies that you and I are paying to the biggest tech oligarchs in the world, are going to cost $2 billion over the coming years. So when I hear people say, oh, well, we don't have enough money to have more affordable housing or to have universal child care or to really fund, or local governments appropriately, I just want to say that's straight up BS. That is nonsense. We absolutely do. We are just spending money in the wrong ways because Republicans do not care about investing in the things that actually help make people's lives better.
And so, from that inside the joint finance view, um, what are some of the other? I mean, you touched on a lot of it there with how you're breaking down how we could pay for it, because that's always such a big question
Yeah.
for Democrats. I don't know if it's always asked of Republicans the same way, but
Oh,
how do
no.
you pay for it, right?
Yeah.
Like the big, how do you pay for it? And you've seen kind of some of the line items with that from being on joint finance and being in
Right.
the legislature. So, I mean, do you foresee a possibility where, this type of budget would be a pretty significant departure from what we've seen over the past, 15 years since Scott Walker?
Yeah, I mean, functionally, we have had 8 Republican budgets in a row. And that's, not Tony Evers' fault because he's put budgets forward that had a lot of wonderful things in them, but the Republicans just threw it right in the garbage. So
Yeah.
so that was never really considered. And in fact, when I would try to bring up things like investments in early childhood education, they would silence me. They would just like turn off the mic and gavel me down. Um, so we are going to see a
A real
complete
bipartisan
shift.
process that we've
Yeah,
seen.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think we're about to see a big shift in the legislature. This is a once in a generation opportunity to actually govern. We are very likely to have a Democratic state Senate. The assembly very well could flip, depends on who's at the top of the ticket. This is a high stakes election and a high stakes primary because the impact that our nominee is going to have on our ability to win seats in the legislature is an aspect that hasn't really been talked about very much, present company excluded, because you obviously do really deep dives into these legislative races. But think about the impact it will have on legislative races if our legislative candidates are asked to account for mistakes or errors or crazy statements said by our nominee. And if it costs more to get our governor candidate across the finish line, how is that going to impact our ability to actually have resources for those assembly races that we need to flip? Um, this is something that really keeps me up at night because I have worked so hard alongside so many people and probably everybody who listens to you to get us to this place where we actually finally have a chance to build the Wisconsin that we deserve. And, if there's one thing Democrats know how to do, it's snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. And we just cannot afford to do that this time. We have to pick the best candidate who can win the primary, beat Tom Tiffany, deliver the legislature, and then govern the hell out of this state.
Hmm. Um, so I want to circle back to something you mentioned there about just different priorities in legislating too.
Mhm.
There, like you said, in some of Tony Evers' budget proposals, there are a lot of good ideas that just
Great
got
stuff.
tossed to the side. I think there are a lot of bills in the legislature that have been stalled over the past, number of years or been blocked by Republican leadership. We saw a couple of those get across the finish line in the most recent session with the postpartum Medicaid extension and the Gales Law
Yeah.
bills finally getting signed. Um, how would you, but between some of those, I guess, stalled bills that might have majority support and some of the more ambitious plans that you have on your agenda that you've laid on your website and elsewhere, how would you find a balance between some of those lower hanging fruit bills and some of the more ambitious plans you have?
I really view governing as a partnership. It's a collaboration. You're working with the legislature. You are also working with the public. And I'm a big believer in responsive, transparent, accountable government. That is what a democracy is. Right? It's not what Trump is doing, which is corruption and secrecy and incompetence and cruelty. So I'm laying out my plans, and I hope that the voters like those. But I understand that in politics, you really cannot accomplish anything by yourself. And I feel so lucky I have been able to get a lot of bills across the finish line. I have been able to make a lot of policy changes. Never once have I ever done anything alone. Right? You're always doing it with other people. And if there's one thing that I can say, it's that the two governors that have been the most transformational in my lifetime have unfortunately both been Republicans. It was Tommy Thompson and Scott Walker. And the reason that they were so effective is because they knew the legislature. They really, really understood state government and how the legislature functioned. And so they were able to stretch their long arms far into the future by making these durable policy changes, not just, personnel at the agencies and rulemaking, right? And this is our chance to do that. And so having the ability to actually work with the legislature and govern is essential. And I think my commitment to doing that, my experience in doing that, effectiveness in doing that is one of the big reasons that WEAC, the State Teachers Union, endorsed my candidacy. It's one of the reasons why I have earned by far the most endorsements of any candidate in this race from elected and former elected officials in every part of Wisconsin. They see, boy, this is going to be our best chance. Let's put our most effective fighter in there to actually use power to get things done. And by the way, I'll just say for my Milwaukee County friends, I also have the most endorsements of folks in Milwaukee County.
Very interesting. So you hinted at this too, but there's a lot of change coming to the state legislature. I mean, this is the
God
first.
willing, let's
Yeah,
do it.
well, so, well, yeah, and regardless of even who wins, there's going to be a lot of new faces. There's a lot of
That's
people
right.
retiring. There's a lot of change. Not only will Tony Evers be retiring at the end of his term in the executive branch, the guy who's essentially been running the legislative branch for quite some time, Assembly Speaker Robin Vos, he's going to be leaving too. So, what are some of the ways that you dealt with Vos and the Republican-controlled legislature, and how would you assess the landscape post Robin Vos?
Boss's departure is a huge opportunity for Democrats, regardless of whether we end up with a trifecta or not, because he had such an iron grasp on that caucus because he held all the purse strings. And I think in a situation where he doesn't write the maps and he doesn't have control of all the money, you're going to see maybe a little bit more independent thinking on the Republican side. And that is something totally foreign. We have not seen that in a generation. And that's going to be a very different landscape. And I will say, I have the majority of the work that I've done, not just as a legislator, but as an advocate, small business owner, all the different ways that I've sort of been rattling the cages and trying to make change have been with a Republican dominated legislature. But some of the biggest policy wins I've gotten were during that session where we had a Democratic Senate and a Republican Assembly, but I was able to peel off a couple of Republicans. We passed things through the Senate, and then we just pound and pound and pound and use that public pressure to force the Assembly to do it. And that's kind of what happened with Gale's Law and postpartum, right? We saw a little preview of that when um, you can actually start to drive an agenda when you control at least one of the houses. And for all my friends in the primary who talk about, well, we're going to have a trifecta, and it's sort of like the underwear gnome story of like, well, first we get the trifecta, then we get the utopia that we all deserve. That step two is kind of an important one because a trifecta is actually really hard because it's going to be a narrow trifecta.
Right.
And when you're all on the same team and you all have power for the first time, and most of these legislators are brand new, right? I mean, they're
Right.
coming in basically since post-COVID, right? 2021 or later. And it is a completely different situation. It's a very different feeling to have power. And so what we don't want to have happen is for any one legislator to be able to hold everybody else over a barrel. And that is why having a governor who is not afraid to use power, but really values collaboration, working together, mutual respect, and coalition building is so important. We're not going to have that trust, and we're not going to beat Tom Tiffany with mealy mouthed moderation. That's not going to work in this moment when people are just furious, rightly so, about Trump and the state of our lives. But at the same time, we're not going to be able to get things done or win the election if we are so culturally out of step with where most Wisconsinites are. We have to have a candidate who has progressive bona fides and can excite the people on the left and young people and the folks we need to bring into our coalition without losing or alienating the swing voters, the moderate Dems, the former Trump voters who are now Dem curious. We've got to be able to have a nominee who can bring those folks together and build a governing agenda that keeps that coalition together. Not that everybody's going to get everything they want or everybody's going to be satisfied, but we need a governor who can actually build that coalition and wield it to get big things done for all of us. Because at the end of the day, if we get power and we waste it, we're going to immediately lose it again.
Hmm. So you've talked about some of the concern you have, it sounds like, for down ballot Democrats if there was a certain nominee. I guess a nominee other than you, or just is there a particular nominee that you have concerns about?
I mean, I think that all the Democrats running have strengths and weaknesses, right? We're all human beings. And I know exactly what Tom Tiffany is going to say about me. It's what he will say about every Dem. I'm a tax and spend liberal. I'm, want abortion up until and after birth, which is just like not a thing, that I'm soft on crime, right? I know what my weaknesses are. But what he's not going to be able to say about me is that I am unprofessional or that I, um, haven't run a ship-shape campaign organization, or that I say things, put my foot in my mouth, uh, repeatedly, because those are the kinds of errors that Trump and MAGA will be able to take advantage of. Look at what they did to Mikey Sherrill and Abigail Spanberger. These people are not playing. We're going to be up against tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of right-wing money, and probably an AI disinformation campaign, the likes of which we have never imagined. So that's a pretty big
Yeah, that's a little
mountain to
discombobulating
climb.
to think about. Yeah.
It is. Yeah. I mean, and, um, you know, I am hopeful. I am optimistic, because I don't think you can do this work for as long as I have without having that sense of like, it can be better, we can build it. But I am also, I think, very realistic about all the different things that we're up against, and why it is so important to have somebody who is capable and steady and disciplined at the helm, helping to lead this effort so that we don't give them a single inch.
Mhm. So you mentioned Tom Tiffany. He's the presumptive Republican nominee. Um,
I'm sorry, is that like I have to do a shot or something?
no, it's just, we've been talking for more than a half hour here, and we haven't really talked about Tom Tiffany all that much. But how do you assess him as a congressman, as a candidate, and how do you feel like you would match up with him if you were to become the nominee?
He's a garbage congressman. Tom Tiffany is the worst. And I say this as somebody who grew up in what was then Obi country, right? My early years were in rural Taylor County, north of Highway 29. Dave Obie was at our one-room schoolhouse for a pig roast when I was a little baby. And so, that has now become Tiffany territory. But every single thing that Tom Tiffany has done has been to hurt Wisconsinites to benefit Trump. The thing about Tiffany is that he is not his own man. He's not an independent thinker. And that is one of the reasons that I think that I am the best candidate to contrast with Tom Tiffany. Not just because I can hold him accountable, because I was there in 2011 when he attacked our teachers and cut public education and tried to repeal our mining laws that, protect our pristine waterways. I was there and I did fight him. But the big difference between Tiffany and me is that I think for myself. And as proud as I am of my progressive democratic values, I am also a person who has never hesitated to call out folks in my own party when I felt that they were wrong. And that doesn't always endear me to, you know, party leadership or the status quo. And I understand that. But I do view my most important responsibility is to do the right thing for this state, for the people of Wisconsin in the long term, no matter what the political consequences might be to me or to my party. And overwhelmingly, of course, I am aligned with Democrats, but there have been a few occasions where I think for myself, and I think in a general election context, somebody who has a really strong track record of working across the aisle, passing bills in every kind of legislative environment, including with some of the most conservative legislators in the state, somebody who's been willing to speak out on issues, for a long period of time, even out against her own party. That's a really strong contrast to a guy like Tom Tiffany, who basically is just a rubber stamp. Trump wants a ballroom, rubber stamp. Trump wants to cut your health care, rubber stamp. Trump wants illegal tariffs that are going to bankrupt the farmers he represents, rubber stamp. That's Tom Tiffany.
Mhm. I have a couple questions about the geography of Wisconsin and this
Okay.
race.
Should I get my
Uh,
hand ready?
One is that, the overwhelming, even before Missy Hughes left the race, the overwhelming majority of the candidates were from two cities or close to two cities, right?
Yeah.
In this race, Madison and Milwaukee. Um, how do you feel like your message resonates in other parts of the state, Western Wisconsin? The Fox Valley, I think, is a really underrated market in Wisconsin for Democrats. Like, how do you feel like your message translates across the state?
I've been getting a very enthusiastic reception as I travel all around the state. I'm on the road usually 5 to 6 days a week and have been this whole year. And everywhere I go, this goes back to, what you sort of asked me about what I've learned is truly what people want for their communities, for their families is really not different, between cities and rural areas. It might look a little different. The policy interventions that you need might take a different shape. But at the end of the day, people want to be able to have good lives. They want their kids to have great schools and bright futures. And they want to be able to just afford a normal everyday life without worrying every day, what Trump is going to do or what ICE is going to do or what's going to happen with our economy. And I think that's very, very reasonable. I will say, I hear some anxiety sometimes in Dane County about like, oh, can a Dane County liberal win statewide? And I just have to respond. The most popular politician in the state of either party is United States Senator Tammy Baldwin. And she's not only a Dane County liberal, she's a lawyer. She's a career politician, an experienced legislator. Uh, she's a lesbian. And she just nails it, right? She just knows how to show up and listen. And I think that is the winning formula. Chris Taylor just delivered the biggest electoral victory that Democrats have had from a candidate. Even though it's a nonpartisan race, it's not really, right? So I think when you look at history, since 1989, every single Democratic senator and governor in Wisconsin has been from Dane County.
Mhm.
Where we have really struggled to take advantage of the political talent statewide has been Milwaukee area candidates. Democrats from the Milwaukee area, unfortunately, have not been able to win statewide. And I think a lot of that has to do with the very intentional way that right wingers have tried to ostracize Milwaukee and turn the state against Milwaukee for political gain. And I think that's really awful. And so one of my jobs as governor, one of my aims as governor is to be a cheerleader for the city of Milwaukee, because it is our cultural and economic center. It is an incredible gem, and we need to be able to see Milwaukee for the incredible asset that it is if Wisconsin is going to reach its full potential.
Mhm. Well, I hope to have an opportunity to talk a little bit more about Milwaukee in the not too distant future with you and some of the other folks in the campaign here.
Great.
Um, but speaking also, my second part of that question about Madison. So you're not the only candidate from Madison running. Francesca Hong's campaign has gotten a lot of attention. You represent some of the same voters, right?
Mhm.
Um, and with her being in the race, there's been a lot of talk about the term democratic socialism in this
Mm.
primary. You characterize yourself as a progressive, but not a democratic socialist. Why?
Because that's what I am. I'm a Democrat, I'm a progressive, I'm a liberal, and I'm somebody who believes that you make change by working with anybody who's willing to partner with you. And at the end of the day, what matters is actually delivering for people. It's not the labels that you put on. And I also think in a state like Wisconsin, we should always be working to cultivate converts rather than hunt down heretics. This is kind of a broader critique of the left. We are very, very good at sort of saying, well, you didn't use the right terms, or you weren't 100% aligned on me, so you're not welcome here. And that's really toxic, I think, to our politics and our ability to actually organize. We should be willing to say, I disagree with you on every single thing except this one thing, so let's get this one thing done. And that's not magic, right? That's just how to be effective in a state that's a very diverse, ideological place. And I'm not willing to shut anybody off or turn people away who want to be a part of this coalition because I'm going to use language that tells them that they're not welcome or sends them away.
Mhm. Well, you've been very generous with your time here. I really do appreciate it. Any final thoughts here for our viewers and listeners and maybe transcript readers even here at the Recombobulation area?
Well, if they got this far, then they are probably no stranger to going to my website to look at my detailed policy proposals. You can look at my legislative website too and just see some of the bills that I have worked on and championed. I will say, I think so often we get caught up in this idea of primaries. Well, we have to choose between our heart, like the candidate who we think aligns with our values and gives us hope and is going to be a really strong fighter, and then our head, the candidate that we think is going to appeal to somebody else, and we're kind of trying to do pundit math. And in this election, we actually can have the most effective progressive fighter who also is the one that has the statewide appeal to win. The vast majority of people in this primary are still not paying attention. They are still undecided. And anyone can win this race if they have the resources to communicate and if they have an effective message. We know from my polling that my message is very effective. I don't have to have the most resources to win. I just have to have enough to get my message out. So I would ask people to really look carefully at all the candidates. Know that you don't have to choose between your heart and your head. You can actually have the candidate who is able to beat Tom Tiffany, ready to govern on day one, and has that progressive values and the fearlessness that this moment demands and deserves. And I hope I can earn your votes on August 11th.
All right, Kelda Roys, thank you so much for joining us here at the Recombobulation Area.
Thank
Best
you,
of luck
Dan.
in the
Great to
weeks
be with
ahead.
you. Thank you.